Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at a moment that has shaken Belarus more deeply than many people expected. A moment where cracks inside the system became impossible to hide as military defections began to hit Alexander Lukashenko's grip on power harder than ever before. For years, Lukashenko has relied on one core belief to keep himself secure, the idea that the army and security forces would always stand by him no matter how unpopular his rule became among ordinary people. That belief shaped every decision he made, from crushing protests to ignoring international pressure, because as long as the guns stayed loyal, he believed the throne was safe. But loyalty built on fear is never as strong as it looks, and what we are seeing now is the slow collapse of that illusion. Military defections do not usually begin with dramatic announcements or televised speeches. They start quietly, with refusals to obey, unexplained absences, and officers suddenly asking for transfers. At first, these signs are easy to dismiss, and authoritarian systems are very good at pretending nothing is wrong. Yet each small act of disobedience weakens the chain of command, and once doubt enters the ranks, it spreads faster than any protest on the street. In Belarus, the pressure on the military has been building for years, especially after the mass protests that followed the disputed elections. Soldiers were ordered to stand against civilians, sometimes against people they personally knew, neighbors, friends, even family members. Some officers obeyed, some hesitated, and some quietly decided they would never do it again. Defections do not always mean soldiers running across borders or publicly declaring opposition. Orders are delayed, enthusiasm disappears, mistakes increase, and the machinery of repression starts to grind instead of moving smoothly. Lukashenko's system depends on speed and certainty, and when those disappear, fear alone cannot replace them. Another factor driving these defections is the changing regional situation, especially the shadow of war nearby. Belarus has been drawn closer into regional conflicts, placing its military under enormous strain and moral pressure. Many soldiers did not sign up to become pawns in wider geopolitical games, yet they now find themselves caught between orders from above and growing unease about the consequences. When soldiers feel they are being sacrificed for political survival rather than national defense, loyalty erodes quickly. Economic pressure also plays a major role in this crisis. Military families are not immune to inflation, shortages, and declining living standards. When soldiers go home and see their families struggling while elites remain untouched, resentment builds. Promises of stability lose their meaning when daily life becomes harder, and that resentment does not disappear when a uniform is put back on. Inside the barracks, conversations change tone. Where once there was silence, now there are questions. Where once orders were accepted without debate, now there are glances exchanged, pauses, and unspoken doubts. Authoritarian leaders fear nothing more than soldiers who start thinking for themselves. Lukashenko has responded in the only way he knows how, with purges, arrests, and increased surveillance inside the military. Yet repression within the armed forces is a risky game. Every arrest creates more fear, but it also creates more anger. Every purge removes experienced officers and replaces them with loyal but often less competent figures. Over time, this weakens the military rather than strengthening it. History shows that when a leader begins to suspect his own army, the endgame has already started. No regime collapses the moment defections begin, but defections change the balance of power in subtle but decisive ways. They signal to the public that the regime is not invincible. They signal to elites that backing the leader carries increasing risk. And they signal to foreign actors that stability is no longer guaranteed. For Lukashenko, this is especially dangerous because his authority is built almost entirely on force rather than legitimacy. Without unquestioned control over the military, he has very little left to rely on. Another key aspect of these defections is the generational divide inside the armed forces. Younger soldiers have grown up in a connected world, exposed to information beyond state media. They compare their lives not to propaganda promises, but to realities they see online. When they realize how isolated their country has become, frustration grows. Older officers may cling to old loyalties, but younger ones are far less willing to sacrifice their futures for a stagnant system. The regime has tried to counter this by increasing ideological training and loyalty checks. However, forced loyalty rarely creates genuine belief. It creates actors, people who say the right things while privately planning exit strategies. This kind of double life is corrosive, and it spreads quietly through institutions. The more the state demands loyalty declarations, the more obvious its insecurity becomes. One of the most damaging effects of military defections is psychological. Lukashenko now has to ask himself a question he never wanted to face. Will the army obey if ordered to crush another wave of mass protests? If the answer is uncertain, every decision becomes harder. Do you escalate and risk refusal, or hold back and appear weak? Both choices carry danger, and this paralysis is exactly what strongmen try to avoid. Internationally, these defections change how Belarus is viewed. Foreign governments watch military cohesion closely. When they sense weakness, they adjust their strategies. For Lukashenko, who relies heavily on external backing, any sign that his military may not be fully reliable complicates those relationships. At the same time, opposition forces draw hope from these cracks. They understand that real change rarely comes from the streets alone. It comes when parts of the system stop defending the leader. Every defection, no matter how quiet, is a reminder that the regime depends on people who can choose to stop obeying. That realization shifts the psychological balance across society. Still, it is important to understand that defections do not automatically lead to collapse. Authoritarian regimes can survive for long periods even with internal dissent. What matters is momentum. If defections continue and accelerate, they become a self-reinforcing process. If they stall, the regime may recover through fear and restructuring. Right now, Belarus appears to be at a critical point where both outcomes are possible. Lukashenko's personal style has made this situation worse. He has ruled for decades by centralizing power and demanding personal loyalty. This means that dissatisfaction is directed at him personally, not just at abstract institutions. When soldiers defect, they are not rejecting a policy, they are rejecting the man himself. That kind of rejection is far more threatening to an authoritarian leader. There is also the question of trust within the security services. As defections increase, paranoia spreads. Units begin to suspect each other. Information is hoarded instead of shared. Coordination suffers. In a crisis, this lack of trust can be fatal for a regime that relies on rapid, unified responses. What we are witnessing is not just a political crisis, but a moral one. Many soldiers are being forced to choose between obedience and personal ethics. That choice leaves scars even on those who stay. A military that has been through this kind of internal conflict is never the same again. Its cohesion is damaged long after the immediate crisis passes. For ordinary Belarusians, military defections carry a powerful symbolic message. They show that resistance is not limited to activists and protesters. They show that even those trained to defend the regime are questioning it. This breaks the sense of isolation that authoritarian systems depend on. People begin to believe change is possible, and belief is a dangerous thing for dictators. Lukashenko's attempts to project strength now ring hollow. Military parades and speeches cannot hide the underlying anxiety. The more he insists on loyalty, the more he reveals his fear of betrayal. In authoritarian politics, fear at the top often precedes collapse at the base. The coming period will likely be decisive. If economic pressure increases, regional tensions continue, and public dissatisfaction grows, the strain on the military will only intensify. Each new crisis will test loyalty again and again. No army can endure endless tests without breaking. In the end, military defections hit Lukashenko hard not because of their numbers, but because of what they represent. They represent the failure of fear as a long-term strategy. They represent the limits of repression. And they represent the moment when a ruler begins to realize that the institutions he controls may no longer believe in him. Whether this leads to sudden change or a slow unraveling remains to be seen. What is clear is that the image of absolute control has been shattered. Once that image is gone, it can never be fully restored, and in systems built entirely on the appearance of strength, that loss can be fatal.